Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is another Red Pill Religion podcast. And tonight we're going to be talking about freedom of speech um, and freedom of the press. Remember to support our work on redpillreligion.com. We have the links to our PayPal and Bitcoin and our Patreon. I don't think we have Maker Support anymore because Maker Support was taken down. Um, those links are also in the description below. But this week, pretty sure this was this week. Yeah, this week, Donald Trump, banned Jim Acosta from from his White House credentials, mainly because what he did was when Jim Acosta went to do what's Jim Acosta does and start trying to question Trump, and Trump is like had enough of this. He wanted some, an actual serious question, um, about the topic that he was speaking on, and and with and he told it, a White House aide was told to grab the mic to take the microphone away from him, and he pushed her away. It was like a snap, judgment jerk reaction. It was reported on Infowars.com, which was called doctored by, multiple media sources. Which they said that it was sped up to make it seem more deliberate. But in my experience, when you have really quick actions, that's not a that's not the sign of a methodical thinker. That's somebody who's um, you know, reacting to that. And I figured that this story, it would be appropriate for us to talk about freedom of speech and freedom of um the press.
Oh,
And
press, yeah.
yeah, tonight we have with us Ghost Buckley. Say hi, Red Pill Religion team member. Say hello.
Why, hello there. It's been a long time.
Yes, it has. We also have Max Colby, the founder of Red Pill Religion. Say hi, Max.
Hey, everybody. I'm just glad to be here and not in charge.
And then we have Mr. Brass, a friend of the channel who may or may not be on the team. I'm not sure yet, because he's never actually confirmed or denied. Um, but he's our deist friend. Say hi, Mr. Brass.
Hello there, everyone. This is Mr. Brass. Nice to be on and to be able to discuss free speech and stuff.
And we have a friend to his channel and Friday's usual our new show's co-host, Comrade Dmitry. Say hi, Comrade Dmitry.
Privyet, I am the Russian bot, always interfering in your elections.
And we have from our Discord, lady known as Mix Barbie. Say hello, Mix.
Hey everyone, how are you?
And we now that all that is out of the way, Max, you had something you wanted to say. We'll have you start off.
Well, it's really interesting to me because when we look at this Trump slam CNN's unprofessional Jim Acosta, I don't think he's a smart person. That's CNN's headline, and that's fine. Um, I watched this, and I watched it more or less happen live. I didn't see it live, but I've watched multiple takes on it and watched the raw footage. And it's interesting to me to watch the dynamic here because I actually come from a whole men's rights perspective, which is different than most people and a little alien to a lot of people. Simply because when you're coming from the men's rights perspective, which is sort of like the feminist perspective from the men's perspective, right? Um, I found myself both on Jim Acosta's side and not on Jim Acosta's side. So I may be disagreeing with some Republicans here, and I may be agreeing with some Democrats to a certain extent. And what I would say there is that what I've seen. Let's first set up what happened. Jim Acosta from CNN was holding his microphone and asking a question, and they were obviously leading questions, provocative questions, questions. I don't even want to say provocative, but I mean challenging in like with a lot of presuppositions in his question, right? I don't want to get. I don't want to try and get into a whole, breakdown of every word he said. But it basically boiled down to, Jim Acosta asking the president, "Aren't you basically a fascist and a white nationalist and evil?" Um, um, this is kind of how I saw it. And Trump was disgusted by the question and gave him a hard time. Um, to a certain extent, the one thing I would say is that the president said, your questions are leading, they're inflammatory. He didn't say it that way. He made he was more brusque about it, but like your questions are BS questions is basically what he was saying. And I'm done with you. And then a White House intern, this lovely girl here, came up to him and tried to take the mic from him. Now, I actually have an objection here to Gateway Pundit and to a few others who characterize Jim Acosta as somehow having assaulted this woman and done something wrong, when really, having watched it over and over again from multiple sources, all Jim Acosta really did to the intern, to the girl, was say, "Excuse me, ma'am, sorry, I'm not done," and push her away. He didn't hit her. He didn't shove her. He didn't even insult her. He pushed her arm away and say, "I'm sorry, I'm still talking." And certain right-wing sources, pro-Trump sources, portrayed that as like practically like he punched her in the face and put her on the ground, and when all he really did is, "Excuse me, ma'am, no," and pushed her arm away. He wasn't even violent about it. Okay,
Well,
so on that sense, I'm on Jim Acosta's side. I really am. He pushed her away. He was a little rude about it, but he could make a case that she was being rude. She just comes up to him and says, "Sir, we're done," and grabs for his mic, and all he does is to her is push her arm away, push her back a little bit, says, "Excuse me, ma'am, I'm not done yet." Um, the framing it of him as assaulting a woman is garbage. Okay, flat out, it's garbage. He did not assault that woman. He did not hurt her. He was not being, anti-woman. He was talking and he was focusing on the president, and he wanted to get his question out, even if it was a leading question still. And, this woman comes up, this intern comes up and tries to take his microphone away from him. And, he didn't hurt her. He wasn't, but all that aside, because I don't accept that he did something wrong to the intern. I really don't think he did. But at the same time, he was being a total ass and trying to hog the stage. So that's how I see it. Anybody else?
well, I mean, he his questions didn't really have anything to do with the White House press conference, really. that seems to be a pattern with CNN, specifically, that they'll ask questions that have no relevance, which takes away time from actual journalists trying to get an actual statement about the press conference, which is the generation of a story. Um, that's how political journalism should work. It's not how it does work, but you know, there's that. Ghost Buckley, did you have anything to say?
Oh yes, yes, yes. So I've noticed that yeah, I would largely agree with Max on this, though I would add that the guy who started talking about how he was assaulted, Paul Joseph Watson, the guy who was the InfoWars reporter who made the video, he said that um, the he compared it to the incident with the reporter and Lewandowski during the 2016 campaign trail. If you remember that, do you remember the Lewandowski incident?
Yeah, yes,
Refresh.
yeah. The Lewandowski incident. That was when Trump and his entourage was moving, and um,
The
a
Lewandowski,
guy like elbowed her out of the way or something like that.
yeah, the Lewandowski. So Corey Lewandowski was Trump's campaign manager. All right, and during the campaign trail, he was they were they he was accused of assaulting a woman named Michelle Fields, who was at the time a Breitbart reporter. And this incident was very famous at the time. It caused Michelle Fields and Ben Shapiro to resign from Breitbart because Breitbart sided it with Corey Lewandowski the over the over Trump's over the woman that got shoved. And Paul Joseph Watson compared Jim Acosta to Corey Lewandowski, who was actually charged with a misdemeanor.
Okay.
Yes,
So
and
that's something that the people who are saying this is this is assault. That's what they're comparing it to. Like this is the left wing version of Corey Lewandowski, Michelle Fields.
Okay.
yeah, and Justin Trudeau and also did something similar when he was trying to get somebody who needed to vote. He pushed some woman with his elbow out of the way and hit her boob, and it caused a big controversy in Canada. Mixed Barbie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, when I was watching the video, well, on CNN, I don't think he assaulted that woman. When I watched it, I just felt like he was trying to get what he was trying to say on the microphone and trying to, pressure on with his emotions about asking, the president what he had the questions, but he has to feel to realize, was the president going to answer those questions, even though you're going to, forcefully ask him those questions? I mean, I just felt like the reporter, had his emotions on his shoulder the whole time when he kept pushing and pushing and pushing, escalating it in a way.
Well, what he was trying to do was generate a story that had nothing to do with what the White House was trying to present to the press. Um, that's my assertion. That's what it just seems to me. But I agree with you that he didn't assault anybody. It just seemed to me like a natural knee jerk reaction when somebody's trying to take something from you, especially when you have an entitled type of mindset.
Yeah.
Um, and it's you're trying to take this thing away from me. And it's like, no, most people would react in a very similar way. So I'm not going to say it was assault, but it wasn't exactly professional.
Yeah.
Because he was, he's taking up the time of actual reporters, actual serious reporters trying to report on, the story that their editors told them to report on. And this CNN guy is trying to create a whole different story, asking questions that he knew would inflame the president,
Yeah.
and and knew exactly that this is the reaction they always get, and it always, you know gives makes CNN's profit go up for a day. That's what I think. In the end of the day, that was his whole motivations of what he was doing, was trying to make more money for his the corporation he was working for.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he should have just handled it differently. But like you said, he's trying to get more money for for CNN. So, and it really made headline. It's
The Clinton News Network.
The Communist News Network.
Oh, it doesn't
Um,
doesn't it stand
well,
for the corporate news network?
Try to take turns, guys. We got 5 people in here. Try to take turns. We're raising hands. Mine's
All right.
up.
okay.
Okay. Go ahead, Max, and then go
Oh
directly
yeah,
after
yeah.
Max.
I just wanted to say we haven't gotten into it, but I actually totally think it's okay for the president to point at a reporter and said, "You're out of bounds. Get out." I actually think it's totally okay for the president to do that. And by the way, I would think that if it were Barack Obama who was president, or Bill Clinton, or George W. Bush, or name whoever, I actually think it's perfectly okay for a president. In fact, sometimes I would even applaud it to just point to a reporter and say, "You're done, shut up," or "You're done, get out." I think a president, name the most president you most hate, and it's still perfectly okay for a president to point and say, "Shut up, you're done, we're done with your questions," or "Shut up, you're done, you're out of here." I think that's totally appropriate. My only objection is the right wing sources acting like somehow Jim Acosta, I don't know, punched this girl in the face or something, when really all he did was push her away. But I'm otherwise on the president's side on this one. And I would be on the president's side if it were another president. That's all I'm saying.
Oh yeah, yeah. I am in agreement on that. I would like to. I just wanted to mention that the reply to that mentioned that it was Jim Acosta was putting on a show. Donald Trump was also putting on a show. Listen to he said things like, he's like, oh, yeah, when Jim Acosta came up to and he said, "Oh, I'm going to challenge you, Donald Trump." Trump says, "Oh well, oh here we go. Come on, let's go." And then later on, Donald Trump says, "You know what? I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN, and if you did it well, your ratings would be much better." That's
That was hilarious.
that was obviously putting on a show, though. He did that
Yeah,
on purpose.
Yes, and he's good at that. He's good at that.
He knew that Jim Acosta would do something like this, and so that's the only reason he let him speak to begin with. I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump only let him in that building because he knew something like this would inevitably happen. Because Jim Acosta has a history of making a fool out of himself. I mean, there's also I'm reading this article from the American Conservative, and the article says the article quotes something from the Society of Professional Journalists saying injecting oneself into the story or creating news events for coverage is not objective reporting, and it ultimately calls into question the ability of a journalist to be independent which can damage credibility. And I think that pretty much sums up my position on Jim Acosta. He's not credible at all. He doesn't report news. He creates news for the ratings. And I mean, Donald Trump, he's still running the country, but if he wants to put on a show, so to speak, I mean,
Donald Trump would put on a show if there's no cameras anyway, because that just seems like the kind of person he is.
well, he's a reality TV star. This is, to him, the news cycle is like a 24/7 reality TV show.
Well, you have to remember, man, he grew up in Brooklyn and was given a small loan of $1 million.
Yeah, and you seriously have people who actually think he's like a white nationalist. That's crazy.
Yeah, how can he be a white nationalist when he's orange?
Orange man bad.
Well, Robert, you wanted to say something, and then Mr.
Oh, I
Brass.
just said what I said, what I wanted to say.
Okay, and Mr. Brass, what did you want to say? So
Yeah, I think Acosta is just. When I've seen the clip, I've seen this. I've seen parts of it from Twitter, and I think, like Max said, I think the news media once again with fake news, and they're telling that somehow he decked her or something, and that's not what happened. He I've seen some of them where they point and say all he really did was just put his hands up, not that he necessarily pushed her, but he just he got her to go back by raising his hands. And some people have actually called it sexual assault. I'm like,
oh, please, no. No, sorry. Go ahead, Brad.
yeah, it's just stupid. I think this whole thing is Acosta isn't really credible, but at the same time, he doesn't seem like he's a woman assaulter or a woman sexualizer in this situation.
Just a dumbass.
Well, yeah,
I think,
but this
I mean, so we can agree that the both the CNN side and the right wing gateway pundit Infowars side are both wrong in different ways.
in much different ways. That there's the way that it's presented, the Infowars site, which I wouldn't call gatekeeping.
No, I said gateway pundit Infowars.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's the way Infowars does it. Not just Alex Jones, although Alex Jones is the most animated of everybody. There is a certain point that they want to get across, and they make that point. It's just, with CNN they do the same thing. And some of their commentators do get animated to, just get, clicks and whatnot. Their written journalism is fairly good. The CNN.com written journalism is you know but their commentators are just, you know um I see them as no better or no worse than Infowars, really.
Well, yeah, they're about as professional as they're less professional than some YouTubers who report the news. Honestly,
Well, yeah, that is true. This goes on to, freedom of speech and freedom of the press. That's they're this. It's the same, right? It's the same, thing. But what are those things? Are because it seems like a lot of people, especially in Europe, think that freedom of speech is the freedom to say whatever you want to say, and to a point that is true. But there's some instances of where the collective good or the greater good um, trumps the actual, freedom to say anything you want. Like saying fire in a crowded building is a felony, because it would incite panic. It's you have that, but I think that personally that freedom of speech is the freedom to criticize the government, and the freedom of the press is the freedom to have a unbiased news source that just reports the facts. When it gets to the, I think a lot of the polarization in politics would go away if everybody was just to ignore the mainstream media altogether. But Max, you want to say something?
Yeah, this is interesting because the whole idea of freedom of the press and the whole idea of freedom of speech, um, to be honest, is, well, I would say it's a very American idea, but it has its roots in the Enlightenment and stuff like that. Which, as a good Catholic, I'm supposed to be resistant to the Enlightenment thinking. But the whole idea of freedom of the press is you can print whatever you want, you can say whatever you want, but there will be consequences to it. Possibly, right? So people may not like you because of what you said or whatever. But to be honest, and sometimes I actually think about it, especially when I watch our corporatist media, I wonder, because that's what they are. They're corporatist globalists. They're not liberals. They're corporatists who are owned by their masters. That's what Don Lemon is. That's what Jim Acosta is. They're corporatists owned by their masters. But the idea of freedom of speech is actually a wildly liberal idea, and not universal to the human species at all, and not universal to human experience at all. And there's actually, I hate to say this because I actually do believe in freedom of speech, but I mean, there's a case to be made against it, because it's not self-evident that we should all have freedom of speech. To me, it's not self. No, I actually do still believe in it. I'm just saying, is it self-evident?
It's not self-evident. But then again, I don't think most of our human rights are self-evident. That's why, I mean, the kind of people who say this right is self-evident, are usually the kinds of people who uh, reject God and natural law, but still want to have some kind of human rights. So they just say that, oh, freedom of speech and right to life, that they're all self-evident. You don't need to defend them. That's generally what I observe. You can make a case for freedom of speech based on the idea that we as people are supposed to speak the truth, but we cannot speak the truth if we're compelled to say lies. And therefore, we need freedom of speech in order to say true things.
Yeah, if you look at it from an old school Thomistic perspective, which is very Catholic and very Western, and so not everybody sees it that way. But if you look at it in in Thomistic, like as in Thomas Aquinas, who really is the basis of Western law in Europe and America. From that perspective, your rights are supposed to flow from your responsibilities, not the other way around. So, like, your right to freedom of speech should be curtailed to like your need to be able to speak up, your justification for it. In other words, the freedom of speech is not just the freedom to be an ass. Although everybody should be free to be an ass, I suppose. But I don't know. The whole idea of free speech actually strikes me as ultimately Christian. It really does, even if it comes from Enlightenment Protestant thinkers. It does still seem ultimately to be Christian because it seems rooted in the idea that, I don't get to strike you or cut your tongue out or beat you up or imprison you or kill you just because you've offended me. That's actually a pretty Christian idea, I would argue. Um, uh, but I don't know. What do other people think?
Well, um, like I said, that's generally my justification for freedom of speech. And there's also, for the purposes of our side on the political, I guess we're all political dissidents in that we are against like the establishment, which
Yep,
is
they
the
are.
establishment corporatists, and we do not want to give any ground to them at all. And I think that undermining our own undermining freedom of speech in any way puts us at takes away our justification for our justification in our argument against censoring us. They're censoring us. If we don't have some kind of moral justification against their censorship of us, then we lose basically. That's another thing I would say besides what I said earlier, and that's why I think that political speech of all kinds, as long as it doesn't directly endorse violence, should be allowed. And this witch hunt by like news outlets it's either ideologically possessed or just scheming corporate money power grab because they want to put out their competition.
All right, let me ask you this then, and I'll ask you this out of the whole audience. Okay, what if I can objectively prove that you are lying, sir? And I don't mean lying about a person, as in libel or slander, but that you're just flat out lying to any objective standard. You are stating that 2 + 2 = 5, and you're convincing a large number of other people to believe that 2 + 2 = 5. And we can even tell that you're convincing people that 2 + 2 = 5 purely for nefarious motives. Getting away from the First Amendment and Enlightenment thinking and all that, and let's just go to like let's pretend it's 5,000 years ago, and we're all looking at it like we know that this bastard is lying. Shouldn't we be able to shut him up? And I'm not putting Buckley on the spot. Anybody. Why do we even believe that somebody has the right to lie and to manipulate people by lying? Why do we even believe that?
We do not believe that people have the right to lie, but we do believe that we have certain leeways. We do believe that a liar does should be given certain leeways, except in maybe in the most obvious of cases, like in cases where they are libeling or slandering someone and it's with malicious intent. And nobody our mistake. I think there was an old saying. A error does not have rights, but people do. You don't have a right to lie, but you do have a right to certain leeway if you are lying and you don't really mean anything with any malicious intent.
Well,
Well,
it goes with, why is that person lying? I mean, even if somebody is lying, for good purposes, some people think that that justifies the lie. I don't think it justifies the lie at all. Um, but
Well, if he's lying and he knows he's lying, then that's obviously wrong.
well,
But
yeah,
if he's saying something that's untrue, and he sincerely believes it, then that's not the same thing as lying.
no, it's not. It's just there's there is a
Ignorant.
there is a we not only with the freedom of speech, the idea of freedom of speech, right? Um, the idea that somebody can tell these untruths, unchallenged is ridiculous, because every single idea gets challenged in some way, shape, or form. That's a really big reason why this channel exists, to challenge a certain worldview, a certain point of view, um, on in a certain movement. And it's, you can't think that, what you're going to say is not going to be resisted in some way, when you say it publicly. And I don't think that that type of thing, that, really is what drives real progress, is the debate of ideas, um, among the common people, not just the elites, but everybody participating in the same type of debate. I think is very good for, the progress of society. Robert Fried wanted to say something, or Comrade Dimitri. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to go back to what Joseph Buckley was saying about how the corporations are wanting to put out their competitors. Yeah, definitely, that's a truism too, because I think what happened is that in 2016 they didn't see they didn't project a Donald Trump victory, because remember they were saying that Hillary had a 93%, 98% chance of winning. So and the alternative media played a huge role in the election of Donald Trump. So yeah.
Yeah, I believe that too.
Well, most definitely, and a big reason why, well, it's a big reason why the Democrats did not do as well as they expected it to, which they stopped expecting that in October. But with with that whole aspect, that these news corporations are essentially, putting out news that is inflammatory, that is, purposely designed to make people angry. Um, purposely designed to make people angry. It is that, correct? Is that a you know an is that something that
What you mean? Speech that is purposely insightful?
yes, but not insightful to violence, but insightful to division. For example, with the whole media coverage of certain riots, uh, since the '90s. Really, it seemed to really, be gasoline than any,
Gaslighting.
well, not gaslighting, but using metaphorical speech here, gasoline on a on a fire.
On a fire.
Yeah, because it seems like media coverage always makes it worse, because the more the
Oh
media
yeah.
looks at it, the more the crazy people want to actually be a part of
Yeah, I
it.
mean, say what you want about the Rodney King incident. There's no way in hell it couldn't have gone as bad as it did without the mainstream media fanning the flames.
Right. Max, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, although the conversation went several ways, I guess since I raised my hand, but I guess the one thing I would say is we really ought to sometimes think really hard about why we believe in freedom of speech. I mean, were we just raised to believe in freedom of speech? Or do we think of freedom of speech as being some sort of entitlement we have just because we were born? Or is it an ultimate right that we have that goes beyond any other thing? Does it come from God? Which, I think if freedom of speech means anything at all, it has to come from God, or it's really just a sentiment, which a lot of people will dismiss and do. But even still, I would make the point, and then I'm going to get offline here because I'm getting tired. But I would say that freedom of speech is just something that, and even freedom of the press, which is more or less the same thing, um, like, still is, and I don't even mean Donald Trump. This could be Barack Obama, or this could be a senator or a congressman or your local mayor, or even your local city, even your local school board, elected school board member. Shouldn't your local elected school board, I mean, like a nobody, whoever he or she is, like I'm a member of the school board, and the member of the press, asks a question and he don't like the question, shouldn't he be just as free to say, that's a BS question, get the fuck out of my face? And shouldn't he be able to say that? And I actually think that's part of the bargain, isn't it, on free speech or free press or any of it? And that's my final comment.
Right. And I agree with you, but we do need to see why we value freedom of speech. I personally value freedom of speech because if you look out throughout history, um, all the governments that did not allow the actual the citizens to actually say, hey, you guys are doing something wrong with the government. It it never ended. It never ends well for that government. It never ends well for that society. Communism, Nazism, the Italian fascism. Those never really ended well. The only fascism that was actually successful, other than Saddam Hussein, was in Spain until the 1970s. But I think that
Yeah, I would agree, but there is an important caveat to this. I would recommend watching an interesting video by Data Distributist, the Distributist on YouTube. He has a video about YouTube censorship himself, where he yeah, I think it's something along the lines of no platforming. He talks about yeah, I think he released it about a year or two ago. It's called Deplatforming: Roaming Millennials versus ContraPoint's After Action Report. And it has a very interesting picture. It shows a picture of roaming millennial Richard Spencer, and in the background it shows the Shadow. If you remember him, he's an old pulp fiction character, the Shadow.
yes,
And the idea is that the idea basically in the video, he talks about how earlier societies relied on censorship, but it's usually it was because the people in charge of doing the censoring were entrusted with the public good, basically. They were entrusted with that they were going to use their position to ensure the public good, and not censor for the purpose of their own personal interests.
but that because of human nature, that doesn't happen. Or if that does happen, that happens rarely, and there's usually some kind of ideological or religious belief or way of thinking that keeps that person from taking the power and using it to progress their own ideology. Like we're seeing with activism today, and activism and lobbyists within the government, especially.
There's there's a lot of stuff that you can uncover with that, but yeah, I would rather defend free speech on pragmatic grounds, and on the grounds that you need free speech in order to be able to speak the truth.
Right, but I mean, if the press isn't speaking the truth, should the press have a freedom of not being controlled by
Well,
the
it really
government?
depends. I mean, it really depends on whether you think that the press is lying on purpose or they actually believe what they're printing.
Well, I think that it's a little bit of both. I think with with CNN, they wanted. I think they're really butthurt about being wrong about Clinton, but it's they've been trying to control the American society since 2003 at least. Their editors at least are very intellectually dishonest. That they'll they'll cut an interview or only use very little parts of an interview, and it's usually in a way that spins the facts into the way that they want them to be. They essentially
Exactly.
mold the facts,
Mm.
which I think is pretty dangerous.
Yeah, that's dishonest too, because it gives you like a different viewpoint on things.
Hey, guys, I'm gonna have to go now. I have to leave early. I'm so sorry, but
That's okay.
It's okay.
We've been going on for about an hour,
Hmm.
and
about 40. I think it's about 45 minutes so far.
Okay.
well, I mean, we've had a good talk so far, so we could wrap it up with everybody's closing questions because it's not really
All right,
that
all
early.
right.
We started at 9:30 and it's 10:30, or we started at a little bit after 9:30 and it's 10:30 right now. So um, we'll start with you, Ghost of Buckley, and then go on down the line.
Oh, well. Okay. Uh,
Okay.
so the what I wanted to conclude from this discussion on freedom of speech, I think the future of freedom of speech in in this country and in the West in general will really depend on what we do about corporate censorship, because I think that's the main concern for free speech going forward. It's not going to be We're not going to be in danger of government. The main danger is not going to come from governments, although it's a bit different in Europe. Europe, but even in Europe, even in China, most of the censorship is going to come from large corporations that may or may not be cooperating with state actors, and they're going to be marching in the name of def- getting rid of hate speech, getting rid of people they consider violent. They're going to have
Islamophobia.
standards, and they're going to have double standards that lean to the left, because the left has a lot of institutional power in a lot of social circles. So what needs to be done is we need to have if we want to be able to talk about free speech in any real way, we're going to have to be able to find a way to defend it from corporate censorship, because that is the future. Corporate censorship is the future of censorship. All right, I've said my case.
Okay, Mr. Brass, you next.
Yeah. I think what's going to really go on with the freedom of speech is that, for one, we have to realize that freedom of speech is a negative right, which is what a lot of rights actually are. A right is really, it tells you what other people can't do to you. Um, you have the freedom of speech, but no one is obligated to listen to you. Um, you know, you have the freedom of the press, but no one's obligated to print your newspapers. You know, that's how I always seen rights. Rights always work in the negative sense. They tell you what other people can't do to you. And I think with freedom of speech here is that, I think it's going to largely depend on, how, our value system that we incorporate into it.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Comrade Dimitri, you're next.
Well, my final statement is I think 2016 was a huge wake up call for the media establishment and media industrial complex, because in many ways I think it probably was worse due to the fact that Trump won, because now they have 4 years to prepare themselves for the next electoral election. So, and during that time, they're going to really come down on quote unquote hate speech and right wing, quote unquote, right wing extremist channels. And I'm noticing it too. I mean, I'm typing in many different YouTube channels, and they're being, they're being put at like the very bottom, the YouTube search results, even though they're incredibly popular. People like Mark Dice and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, I think this corporate censorship, via acting as a proxy for the state, i.e., government, is just a nightmare come true.
Right. I agree with that. Mixed Barbie, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think corporal censorship is huge now since of technology, with how technology is, and now it's like I think people just have to use basically their own common sense, instead of letting fake news tell them what to do. Common sense. Yeah.
Right. I agree with that as well. There's a lot to freedom of speech. There's I don't and what Mr. Brass said was absolutely correct. Most rights are negative rights, or they're rights that people or organizations, because the group rights are just as important to individual rights as individual rights is important to group rights. There needs to be a balance there, but it's still what you can't do to somebody else. You can't libel somebody. You can't incite panic. You can't incite violence. There's a lot of things you can't do. When it comes to rights, I would think that things like freedom of speech, separation of church and state, which isn't actually a right, it's more of a clause, but the right to bear arms and stuff like that. These rights are, more values than rights, and I think we should really, you know, be start getting skeptical of the idea of rights. And it's like, are these rights, you know, or are these, values that everybody within my society should agree with? Um, because even with, even with rights, even if the rights was changed to values, they I don't think they would change. Really, not the social responsibilities of these rights, and not the rights themselves, but it would help foster more thought on these subjects, and things like that. And I think that we should really question, like Max was saying, we should really question whether or not, you know our thoughts about freedom of speech comes from ourselves or from our upbringing. Just about everything should be questioned like that, in my opinion. But let's see here. All right, give us a like, give us a subscribe, tell your friends and enemies. We thank you for joining, and God bless.